we are going to do our closing conversation. We are going to invite 6 of today's speakers up to the stage. We're going to talk. This is your opportunity to throw out any questions you may have had saved up. And then, like has been talked about for a while, we have a terrific cocktail party planned out on the farm. We've got live bluegrass. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a nice way to wrap up the day. With that, I'd ask Carter Williams to come up. Carter's going to moderate. And then I would also like to invite Geof Rochester to the stage, Kelly Louth, Matt Crisp, David Lee, and who am I? Oh, Dr. Lustig. How could I forget? The most quoted man of the day. Anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carter, and I will see you at cocktails.
So while we're all gathering here, I want to also thank Paul and Eva. In terms of, we sat down, I don't know when we decided to do this, maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago, against the headwind of COVID. We obviously have talked a lot about healthcare today. We've talked a lot about agriculture. We have observed that food is health affects COVID, and have been frustrated that that subject has not been discussed more in the public press. And so there's a certain amount of bravery in terms of Paul's efforts to pull this event together against the questions of can we even get together as a group. So I thank you very much, Paul, for suffering through the anxiety of that entire process and pulling this off for us today. So we're still missing a couple people. We've got them working on the mic. So to add to this conversation, sometimes I say, and our job is God gave us one mouth and 2 ears. We learn a lot through the process of investing by listening to the companies we look at, listening to our audiences. There's a great article by Ray Kurzweil called The Law of Accelerating Return that really describes that technology in the near term often underperforms expectation and in the long term overperforms. And if you look at that article, you realize, if you're a geek about this stuff, that it's about information and feedback systems, it's about understanding markets, it's about early adopter customer behavior and speeding that up. And so today, what we'd like to do in this last bit is really get more perspective from everybody else. We have a large effort in front of us. How do we change the food system? It may take as much as 20 years. I don't mind doing it in 10. And so we got to speed up the process of adoption. And so we'll start here with the stage around the questions of what we learned today, but also I'd like to hear that. I'm going to ask you all who are still paying attention what you learned today and try to understand so that we can speed the process up here of capital allocation to new innovation. So the question today, which I'll just go down one by one and then we'll open this up, is what did you learn today? We'll go you first.
Me first.
Go straight down here.
Let me think about it. I learned a lot. I learned that the technological fixes, going back to my first slide, technological fixes are closer than I had anticipated. I actually thought that this is going to require a public health approach, and I can see maneuverings and efforts on the part of people up here on the dais and in the audience today that can make significant contributions a whole lot quicker than I thought they would.
Good. David?
I was surprised to see how much common ground there is amongst. It's a little bit of Rob's comment. It's interesting how we're all looking at the same problem, but from a slightly different lens. Whether that comes from a public sector standpoint or frankly, the use of capitalism. And so I'm very encouraged by today. It's nice to be amongst so many great peers. And the common, how many times do we all use the word system and data? It's just, we're all thinking about the same elements to make a difference. So that's what I learned.
I was stunned by Dr. Lustig's presentation. I knew some of the food and nutrition story. I hadn't seen it overlaid with economics. right? The 1.7 trillion, the 1.9. I was also saddened by Holly's frame of reference that there are zero incentives in the healthcare system to help people to prevent this. Right?
I mean, go science and go STEM, holy cow. So it gives me hope, honestly, to be here today. And I actually learned a lot, to be honest. I won't delve into the details of everything that you guys shared, but I think what it left me with was more questions. And about how do I take what you all are doing in this room in Brooklyn, New York, and make it relevant to rural Kentucky, to the indigenous communities that we work with in South Dakota, to all of the other schools and entities that we serve. So thank you.
Matt?
Maybe two things. One, I enjoyed hearing the reiteration from one of the panelists today that where money's made in healthcare is really sick people. And unless you're really sick, I mean, that's what's paying the bills in the system. And it gets back to this point about how are we structurally designed to bring forward food as part of the solution. It ties to the other point, though, that I've been pretty adamant about our passion, my passion, to drive affordability in food. And I get asked this question sometimes around, well, don't you think we should be spending more on our food? And the answer is, yeah, we should, but then there's this counterbalance, right? Because there's a lot of folks who spend a substantial portion of their income on food as it is now. And so it starts to beg the question around what sort of bands of market opportunity there might exist. And for sure, those willing to pay a green premium in the near term for what might even be considered novelty, product, might help deliver or drive, accelerate the solution. What amount of time do we have in order to collapse those cost curves? I was kind of left wondering about that, because certainly we can unlock latent demand with cost and price reductions, but that isn't going to happen overnight. And then what is the sequence? What is the stack of value creation opportunity?
Yeah.
On that question, if I can tag on.
Please.
There's a professor of environmental sustainable agriculture at Michigan State by the name of Michael Hamm, who's modeled that question that you just asked at the end. How much time do we have? And what he figured out is we're going to need 4 central valleys of California by the year 2040 to produce enough food just for this country, never mind anywhere else. And we won't even have one because of climate change, soil erosion, runoff, et cetera. So
To supply the demand of what would be an appropriate diet for.
Right, absolutely, for an appropriate diet. So this obesity epidemic is actually going to solve itself because we're going to have generalized famine instead.
Because we're
That is so grim. Darwinian.
Indeed.
Darwin.
We just
Indeed.
need, we just need 5 app harvest, man. That's on its way.
Well,
We don't need
get
Central
working.
Valley. Try.
So I want to extend this to the audience, and I'm going to call on people if people don't raise their hand. So do we have a mic out there? I'd like to understand what people learned. Mike Kime?
So there were 2 really interesting presentations for me. One was Kelly's group and their conversation about the things that have the real problems with getting people to eat a healthy diet and the challenges at a local level of getting people to change their habits. And the other was with the bankers who talked about the need for scalability. And that seemed like a dichotomy at first that didn't work. But when you think about it, it's really a dialectic that needs to happen. Because you don't ever get to the issues that Kelly is addressing unless you deal with taste and price first, and that's where scalability comes on. And then once you deal with those, you have to have a conversation with Kelly and her team about how do we build the markets here, how do we get these solutions down to individuals, and that's a dialectic that I don't think there's been enough of the understanding between the capital finance world and how we actually build these markets on a realistic local level too. And I think that having more of that's going to be a good thing for our industry.
going to call out, I'm sorry, I am going to call on people if they don't ask. I apologize, we met from Wellington. You want to introduce yourself? And we had an interesting conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. I work for Wellington, the Climate Innovation Fund. I learned a ton today, and not dissimilarly to what the themes we've heard before, that there are a number of different players in the ecosystem all working towards incremental changes that, in summation, I think will help us see very large transformation. And so if we can be really efficient and effective at focusing on those individual transformations at solving problem X or Y, whether it's nutrition or yield, we'll see some really big outcomes that hopefully solve for a lot of the problems we've been talking about.
Well, and that triggers a thought that I've got. We talked about a systems approach, and a systems approach also means, and that you led that conversation, so that systems approach also means that companies collaborate. So for the companies in here, did any of the companies see an opportunity to collaborate to move their market forward? Jim? You want to answer that question, or I will start just asking.
There was a New York Times article not too long ago by one of my colleagues arguing that we actually needed the National Defense Production Act for food, and we needed to appoint a food czar to actually coordinate efforts amongst the people in this room to work not at cross purposes and not in competition, but rather complementary purposes to be able to solve this disastrous problem that is about to confront us in a big way.
So I'm going to ask a controversial question here, maybe. For all the frustration perhaps some people have had about FDA or CDC, should we be more upset with CDC for not dealing with the food issue?
I'm livid about CDC and NIH.
On the food side.
On the food system and COVID. I mean, you couldn't get me more angry. I mean, you take a look at, they offered us 3 ameliorative phenomena: hand washing, social distancing, and masking. They left out the 4th, which was food.
So you quoted a study to me, I think, that said that if you drop sugar, you reduce your COVID risk 40% in 12 days? Or something?
Well, no, we improved insulin sensitivity within 9 days, and insulin resistance is the thing that increases COVID mortality. So you could actually, stay out of the hospital, even if you got COVID, if you just ate a half-decent diet.
But to be
And
provocative,
you never heard anyone, not Fauci, not anyone, say anything about food.
what's the
through this whole
stage
thing.
after being livid? It's like the government. I mean, I just have to say, I'm biased because I've been in the private sector mostly, but it's like waiting for good. I have absolutely, the urgency of the problem we face must be solved with the private sector, because I have absolutely no confidence there's any emerging change from the public. I think you're right. I hope they would, but there's no evidence.
Well, I'm afraid the private sector is what's propping up food subsidies, and food subsidies have to go if we're going to make any headway.
But
so
not
you're
not
going to
all
need government
of the
in some
private
fashion.
sector. Not all of that. I mean, I think we saw examples today of incredible investors and hopefully a few decent entrepreneurs who are trying to use capitalism to make change. And I would argue those of us who are trying to do it on the private sector side are doing it a lot faster with greater passion than what I see on the public sector side.
And David, I may not believe in the feds, but I believe in mayors.
You believe in what?
Mayors at the unit city level. And that's why I was so happy that Eric Adams' person was here, because hopefully if he becomes the next mayor, he's walking in with an agenda. Now, he'll be encumbered with some of the bullshit of politics, et cetera. But I think we have a history in this country of mayors leaning in and taking real thoughtful action for their cities.
Well, go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to say, I think you're right about the private sector. I would just also say, let's work together so that the social and public sectors are held accountable and do better, right? So partner with me in education, and I'll show you the way.
Well, so if Matt is figuring out his calculus, am I going to develop new product that's going to go to a higher price point market, or I'm going to develop another product that's going to go to a different price market? Now, the answer that we always say is, go talk to early adopters and figure that out. So how do we turn mayors into early adopters?
Right.
I mean, is that a way to?
I think, and somebody as smart as Dr. Lustig could figure it out, what's the economic argument, right? When someone lands in an emergency room in New York, I was talking to Holly about this, when they have heart surgery at $100,000, and if that person is not covered by insurance, how does that hit the P&L of the city? And how much is it worth to prevent that outcome? So I think that it's building this ecosystem around the economics that people participate in to create the incentives.
The problem is that these two issues have remained siloed and continue to be siloed at governmental levels.
Yeah.
Okay, if they actually dump them into the same pot, i.e. food and healthcare, and actually looked at them as a single issue,
Correct.
okay, and looked at the balance sheet, okay, and they realized that these two things are inexorably yoked together, you could actually solve it. But there are so many lobbyists, keeping that from happening. It's not funny.
We had Jim on the stage. I don't know if he's ready to go. This is. Sure. So, and I'm asking a little bit because, for example, well, Jim, go ahead. I don't know if you can get your mic to work.
Yeah, I think so. I'll start with just from the first talk, which I have 3 little kids, and I would say just personally, we try to limit processed foods and sugars, but I'll be taking an even more serious stance on that when we get home. I already texted my wife, so that's one thing I learned. The other one was just reinforcing how interconnected this all is. We kind of work with the grower and then up to the ag input companies to help them develop better products, down to the CPG food companies, and just seeing everybody shooting at the same goal was really encouraging and inspiring. I guess one question back to you, Carter, or other investors, what was missing here today? What didn't we? This is all one interconnected system. All these pieces need to move in concert. Was there? What would you list as something that maybe we're not yet thinking about or covering here, or just wasn't represented?
I can answer that. And I know that certainly in our frustration is getting more institutional investors here, and I'm not sure how to solve that problem yet. But one thing that we've seen is this giant wave of technology. I think the conversation we had with Sanjeev around energy transition and how do we set up capital structures appropriately to help underwrite these things so that when companies go public, they don't have to use equity to fund debt and they don't have to pay a lot of debt and all that. So there's that mess needs to get worked out, and I'm not quite sure yet how to bring the later stage Series C, Series D crossover funds into these conversations. So I need help on that.
I would have liked to have seen food retailers.
Food retail, that's good. Very
Geof and I tried very hard to do that, but I saw a lot of their names up on the slides, the various slides.
Right.
But I would love to get their perspective and get their take. I don't know if there's a reason they're not in the room, but they should be.
Well, certainly CPG on the startup side, I should ask Sanjeev. Sanjeev was going to be on this panel and we ran out of space, and I apologize for that. But Sanjeev, should we have had more CPGs here? Is he left? Well, he's hiding. Yeah. Yes, we should have, or yes, you're here. Where is he?
Just to answer the question, I think a ton of retailers would have wanted to be part of this and could be part of the solution sometimes in just finding that common ground.
Yeah.
I would also say, having worked for 30 years in big CPG companies that are also framed, having worked for like 30 years in big CPG companies that are often framed as the enemy, sometimes they want to be part of the solution and enabling, a voice in a forum like that's not a bad thing. It's a good way to bring more resources, and fundamentally, they touch the food that people eat every single day.
So
Yeah,
I'm going to say 6 words in response to that. Indra Nooyi, Denise Morrison, Emil Faber. They're all gone for trying to do the right thing within the system.
God, at first I thought you were saying they were dead. I'm like, what, today?
Let me just add to that a minute, though. We did try hard to get Kroger here, the head of their foundation. For those of you that know Kroger from the distribution side, I would encourage you to look at their stance on some of these issues, like zero waste, like equity. They're testing a mobile food unit in Louisville, Kentucky to solve the problem of food deserts. And they're quietly making, they're creating almost like accelerator programs for people like you in the room. So for those of you that know the distribution side of Kroger, I'd make sure you understand the investment side and their stance on hunger and nutrition and these other issues. They're trying to lean into this. And I do think next year we should try to, or you should try to go big with the food, maybe have food retail panel, right?
I mean, I think we should too, but just to bridge, it is really hard to self-cannibalize your business if it's entirely reliant on bad food. I mean,
Yeah.
I sold fruit and veg in a can, and I had a hard time getting to fresh. I mean, it is a hard thing. You know, if you're a Section 16 officer of a public company and you think there's huge growth in 5 years, if you completely risk your entire franchise, it's just a very challenging thing to do, to ask any leader.
I agree with these comments, and as well some of the names you mentioned. One observation I would make in the last year, because I agree with this point that David just made, that to have someone, let me back up. So we went to one of the big two snack beverage companies, no names, in that era, in Indra's era. Anyway, and you know, when we sat down with the quote unquote innovation team, you know, innovation was, there was a presentation about innovation, and it was like, we use this font and we changed the color orange this way, and guess what happened? More people really loved it. And that was innovation. And I mean, I was sitting there, you know, working with an agricultural biotechnology company, like, oh my gosh. So fast forward now, what I hope that we'll latch onto and really appreciate that's different today than it was 5 years ago, or maybe even just 2 or 3 years ago, is that these quote unquote innovation groups in big CPG have a really unique moment in time right now, because you're talking about new category development. And when we talk about, like what David said, you're trying to get somebody to invest in medium to long-term differentiation, innovation, verticalization, all this stuff, and take a risk against, or take risk, magnificent risk, against where money is made. That is a really freaking tough lift. But when you say, I've got this plant-based brand and I've got this much money to go do 5 more plant-based brands, the amount of engagement that we're seeing from folks who are in new product category innovation is just order of magnitude different. Approach, investment angle, speed, totally different conversation.
Isn't that latent demand again? The demand is there. Change the slotting fees.
Well, we all believe that that's the case, and I do, and they do, and we do. But they're being funded to go attack that as a category.
Yeah.
And I think that for the first time, you're actually seeing some of the dynamic of the market conditions and the pandemic era, all of those macro factors that have lent themselves towards the cataclysmic growth of this category are forcing a different ideology, a way of thinking around that kind of innovation and that speed. And again, I've never worked for a massive company, but I appreciate the comments that are. Yeah, well, not massive yet, but you know, I appreciate these comments. I just want to say, I think there are companies out there, even the big CPGs, who I've found to be enormously frustrating to deal with, even just a few years ago, who are taking really interesting playbook approaches to what's happening in plant-based. And this is a category that hopefully helps teach us how to behave, helps them learn how to behave a little differently.
So really, a latent demand quiz here. How many people have a Gen Z at home during pandemic and as a result changed your diet and lost weight? Just 2? 3, 4, 5, 6? the behavior of the, I mean, to think about the younger generation changing the older generation's diet is sort of an unexpected market signal. Were you about to say something? Christine?
I'm just wondering.
Oh, microphone.
In these areas that are the food deserts that you describe, is there an option for the kind of next generation of healthy processed foods that, you know, Frito-Lay tried to accomplish, right? Is there a kind of version 2.0 that could be delivered to the network of Dollar Generals where people are shopping? It's obviously not a solution to a lack of fresh food, which is a terrible problem, but it's better than what's happening now.
I think there are some, shall we say, things on the horizon. I don't think it's there yet. I'm working on a couple of them, you know, in association with food companies, not taking any money, mind you, doing it purely, you know, for $0, you know, so I can be honest, and you know, also you know, as a chief medical officer of a company that's trying to basically turn processed food back into real food in your intestine by sequestering sugars and starches so that they don't reach the liver and ultimately feed the gut. So, you know, I think there are potential ways of dealing with this. I think all of these will be stopgap measures until we actually fix the food system entirely. So I see these as 10 to 20-year fixes, but we're going to have to actually do some really heavy lifting to rethink the entire food business model so that corporations are rewarded for doing the right thing instead of the wrong thing.
But
and that is going to take government.
I think what you bring up is really important, though, because if we don't change the way that we go into a gas station and pick out a snack, especially for kids, then I can build all the community gardens in these hard-to-serve places that I want, but I'm still competing at the end of the day with the Little Caesars on their street or the gas station or the Dollar General. So we have to start thinking about the whole ecosystem of that and where kids and families are accessing food. So I think, yes, and I agree, it's not the solution. There's solutions. You all are the solution in this room, right, and our partnerships. But we have to start thinking about smaller communities and the way people are just accessing food in a faster way, because all these other cool things people are doing aren't going to be sustainable if we don't.
We talked about this last night, I think, over cocktails. You go out to eastern Kentucky, Hazard. There is a Hazard, Kentucky, right? Dukes of Hazzard. There's a real place called Hazard. And you drive into a gas station, and you see, in essence, you know, a small restaurant as part of the gas station. It's the only game in town. And you go to the beverage section, and there'll be 3 cases, and one is stacked with Mountain Dew. Someone told us a story this morning about a parent who had their kid's teeth removed because they'd rotted from Mountain Dew. Oh, yeah. The nurses show up at Appalachian Regional Health, the nurses show up for their shift at 6 o'clock in the morning with a can of Mountain Dew. So I think meeting people where they are, Whole Foods is great, Trader Joe's is great, fine. Bodegas, right?
Yeah.
And gas stations and points of distribution like that, yes.
Don't forget that education has never solved any substance of abuse. And it's not going to solve this one either, not alone. Okay? For every substance of abuse, pick it, cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, we had individual intervention, for lack of a better word, we can call rehab, and societal intervention, which for lack of a better word, we can call laws. Rehab and laws, they work for all the others in order to basically keep the lid on it. For sugar, we have nothing. And until we have something, don't expect anything to get better. So we have rational actors, we have irrational actors, and we also have hedonic actors. They don't care what it costs. They just need their fix.
How long do you think that it'll take for some of these, you know, ingredients to have the same taste profile?
Wow, that's the eye of the beholder in a way. But I mean, we know that taste drives everything. I mean, that's your entry point. It's the single most important factor, no matter what category of food you're talking about, whether it's processed, not processed. I mean, my personal opinion is I mean, not to go too far back into the technology, but what we see is the more data we can assimilate And the more we can tie how to manipulate these data and make predictions and then ultimately affect that in the realm of biology, it's a data problem. I mean, this is a technology bottleneck more than it's any of these other things.
I think it's already happening, frankly. I think you're seeing technology in food taste better, be healthier, and have the ability, one scale, to be cheaper. That doesn't change behavior to this point raised, but and the market's just getting going.
Right. It is. But back to the processed food side of this for just a second. I mean, one of the biggest reasons why we have to put all this crap in this stuff is because it tastes bad to begin with, right? We're not doing it because we're addicted to it. We actually just have to put all this stuff into it to make it palatable in the first place.
When we took the fat out of the food, it tastes like cardboard. So what'd they do? Add the sugar. And we know that's true because the dietitians in your kids' school are supporting chocolate and strawberry milk because they know that the 1% milk tastes like dishwater. You grew up on full-fat milk. Are you dead?
It's a rhetorical question, just to be clear. Don't answer it literally. We know.
So we've got 12 seconds left. And Christine is still alive. So one last question in here. David, did you have one? No, right, oh, no, back there? Where? Craig? Yeah. Who? So who had the question?
So one of the things that I constantly think about, particularly with my kids' generation, and Matt and I were talking about this the other day, is they get instant feedback, right? They are all about instant feedback. And as we all know, you're not getting, when you eat something, you're not getting, you might get some intestinal distress or otherwise, but you're not typically getting instant feedback. It takes weeks or months before those 5 pounds show up, or you go to the doctor once every year for a physical and get blood work and you find out your cholesterol or whatever else is up. What do we do to change it so that somebody can get more instant feedback about what they consume and the impact that's having on their metabolism and their overall health situation?
So I'll do that one. So as an example, there are several companies that are doing this now. I'm an advisor to one particular company called Levels Health. And basically, they're a software company that uses continuous glucose monitoring from either Dexcom or Abbott in order to be able to document your glucose excursion in real time. And what they've learned from all the work that they've done is show that everybody responds differently to all different kinds of foods. So you have to know yourself. And you can't possibly know yourself unless you actually monitor the data.
Are they finding that feedback system is causing people to be motivated to change their diet?
Absolutely. But of course, these are early adopters. They're going to be motivated anyway. The question is, what about the, shall we say, recalcitrant eater? Will it change their lifestyle? That we don't know yet. That we don't know yet.
That or Darwin's going to solve it.
Yeah, well, I believe in Darwin.
Okay, so I think we're going to call it there, correct? I want to thank everybody on the panel. I want to thank you for joining us here, for showing up for this event. We have shared a lot of mobile numbers. From a standpoint of the iSelect team, we are eager to strengthen this network. S2G, I think, feels the same way, and we're trying to strengthen this network because we see a lot of opportunity that we want to grow. We intend to do these things more in the region out here to bring more capital providers in, and so please add your comments to our team after this. Thank you again, Paul, for pulling this off. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We've got drinks now?
We do.
Drinks, music. Do you have anything else you want to say?